Hey everybody, Javan Bernakevitch with All Points Design with Neil Bertrando of RT Permaculture. And today we're talking about the Oregon State University's assignment number 3. We're talking about base maps. So we're going to be talking about convention. We're going to start going into graphic convention. We're going to talk about how different people have rendered this. We're not asking you to be architects. We're not asking you to be technical in this. We're asking you for clarity. So remember that word in this, clarity. Of the requirements that are outlined for the assignment, you want to be able to communicate it clearly. We're going to show you very easy ways, usually through PowerPoint or through other simple graphical means, and also through pen and paper, that it's very easy to demonstrate this. And we're going to show you some folks who've been doing this for a long time and some folks who just started. So we're going to show you all of these different pieces. And first, we're going to start off with something very simple. So this was a great base map with not a lot to show, and sometimes there isn't a lot to show, especially if you're in big rural Alberta that was split up into sections years ago and just thrown up on the grid. So here we've got a lot of the information we need, and a lot of things that people forget. We need to see utilities. We need to see where those utilities are. We need to see if there's power, if there's electricity, if there's natural gas. We need to see if there's sewer lines. We need to see if there's water lines. We need to see if there's telecommunication lines. You need to start taking a look at that. If you don't know that, you can always call for service, at least in North America, and either find if there's a map, so you can call the specific utilities and say, I'm looking at potentially doing some design work or building work. I'd like to see a map of the property, and you can translate that onto your map. Or you can go all the way to calling, usually, at least in North America or in Canada, you can call somebody, they'll come out and they'll actually locate the lines, and then you can put them onto your map. Very important to see the utilities. You don't want to make the mistake of digging into a utility. I've seen it happen once. I never want to see it again. It's not something you want. Boundary property line. So convention for property line is usually red, usually dotted. They went with a solid. That's fine for our work in this course. If you want to go with a line style that's working with convention, feel free to look it up. Notes, site and vicinity currently under cultivation. Great. What's my first question? Cultivated with what? With what process? What's the history? I want to start to know what's going on the site. No existing structures or perennial vegetation, 5 acres, elevation 1025 meters. Fantastic. They've shown me there's a slope. If there was any contour lines on here, I would love to see them. But this is a very simple on PowerPoint created map, base map. It has everything. Like I'm very happy with this map, but it's very simple. Neil?
Yeah, so some other things of note, it's got a scale bar, 100 meters there. If you're going to use measurements, make sure that you keep your measurements in the same unit set. Like I would like to see 5 hectares if they're using meters. I'm not sure what the standard is in Canada, but I like to keep metric and metric and imperial and imperial. And then they have a great legend. It's easy to read. It's called out. What I don't see here that I would like to see is who made the map and the date they made the map. So the name and the date. And that's actually really important, especially if someone else is looking at the map and they have any questions, then they can get a hold of, or at least know who to ask for the person that made it, and then also when it was made. For yourself, it's great to know when it was made, because it's likely that you're going to make a series of maps and explorations on your site, and you want to understand when those are made in relation to each other. So if you go back to a version, you understand what you have done after that or before that.
Great points. Great points. So now we're going to go to somebody who's been doing map making, obviously, for a long time. They have a lot of design work behind them. They were an architect, and they know how to use their drawing skills. So this was a hand-drawn map, and they've done a lot of things really well. They've given us a sense of the boundaries. They've given us really clear labels. They've kept with the same plane of labeling. So they've gone on a right angle. One thing I'll tell you right away, make sure that pretty much everything is horizontal unless you know how to do this and do this well, and this person does, so not a big issue, but work mostly with horizontal titling or labeling. Don't get fancy on that. There's lots of other things to get fancy on. Titling is not one of them, especially if you're just learning. They've given us some color differentiation, so they've given us a sense of what paving is, so that's very clear. Mixed plants and shrubs, don't need to know that level of detail just yet. evergreen trees, deciduous trees, hedge. So already we're getting good delineation. Lawn, so I know what the lawn is. Property boundary, so the property boundary is very clear. That could have been a little clearer, actually. That could have been a little bit brighter. Gas supply, water supply, electrical supply, storm drain. Getting a really good sense now about where all the utilities all are. Rainwater collection barrels, so getting a sense of what's already pre-existing. Compost tea, sewage, contours. So here's something I really appreciate, is seeing contours on your base map. When I used to do my drawings by hand, I would draw them in pencil just like this individual has done, and I would use a dull highlighter and highlight them, because then I could look at them or I could not look at them and they would actually fade into the background. If you do put on your contour lines, make sure to label the elevations so we know what kind of slope we're dealing with, and make sure we know what the units are. So we've got in meters. Notes, water flow not shown as properties very close to watershed boundary. Large trees outside property shown as they have a significant effect on the climate. So he's told us, yeah, it's outside of the property, but that's why I included it. Building and hedges from the properties of the property as indicated, except for one wooden fence, 13 meters and 2 garden gates. So getting a sense of all the different attributes here. Sewer continues to the city sewer, storm, like where everything goes, and showing us what the standard is. Again, we've got the title, we've got the address, we've got the course, we've got the title, they're showing us how many revisions they've made. Again, show your work, and again, the name. This is like gold stars plus 10. Really great map. Now, again, this person has a lot of experience doing this, but that doesn't mean you can't copy. Like, this is all about just copying what other people do and then starting to add whatever is specific to your property. So feel free to copy, copy, copy. Neil?
Great. A few things that I see here that I would maybe do slightly different or just of note. One is the contour lines. Does it have the interval down in the legend? I would like.
The interval is just labeled directly onto the lines. Yep.
So if you don't label the actual elevation on the lines, put the interval and then use some sort of marker to show which direction the slope is in going downhill. And that's a way to do it as well if you don't have actual distinct elevations, because sometimes you won't be able to get those. What I do like on that is that they have put them a little bit lighter. What I want to emphasize that they could have done here, they used a little bit on the pink line, is changing line weights. So like for the property boundary, that would pop that out a lot more effectively if they just made the line thicker, you know, or thinner for other stuff. So you can use a change in line weight. That's as effective as a color often. Or using a change in line style, like a dotted or a dashed line or a line with hashes across it. Those sorts of things are very effective. And then on the labeling, the verbal labeling that they put on here, a lot of times instead of doing that, I will use just numeric or coded labeling, alphanumeric, like A1, A2, A3, so on and so forth. And then you just put those in your key or your legend and reference to what they actually mean. And so that way you can get a lot more information packed tightly onto the map without having necessarily the words distracting you from what's going on. And it allows you to fit, you know, those, like if you just have 1 or 2 characters, it allows you to fit it into a small space if you have a big word. So those sorts of things are helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as Neil was saying that, I just showed an example here. So A1 over the garage, A1 in the key in garage, if you want to remove some of the noise and the busyness within your map. Quite simple and easy to do.
Yeah, and you can select your code however you want. It could just be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you do that, it's ideal to, you know, number things from top to bottom or left to right so that it's easy to reference it all. If you just have 1 in one place and 2 totally on the other side and then 3 in between, it can get confusing. So you want to have some sort of order to it as well. You know, just like all these words in the legend and the notes are all written in the same orientation, that really helps.
So this is an example of a drawn base map. So some of you will be doing drawings, and that's totally fine and totally acceptable. They've, again, made this very clear. They've labeled a lot. They've shown different styles of symbols. They've shown different line weights, so showing PVC or gravel French drains. They've shown power lines. So they've changed some of these line weights so we know exactly what we're looking at here. Something that they could have done a little bit more is start to play with color so we could see the delineation a little bit more, because everything is a pencil line. They've given us a scale, they've given us a north arrow, they've given us everything we want in the titling. Something that I recommended to them was starting to do what's called a title block, which means that you have a block that has this in every single one of your maps. So the address is in the same place, the title's in the same place, the scale's in the same place, the rose compass, the legend. So you're not always trying to put them in places. They've also given us a sense of where things are in terms of relationship here. They've also labeled the major road. So everything gives us a pretty good sense of where it is. But again, looking at this, it's a little difficult to then go back and take a look at the legend and then come back and see all of this and go, okay, what's that brickwork? Okay, so they've got some kind of bricks as a roadway at some point. Okay, interesting. They've got these big circles, and then you're going to go back and say a circle with an S. No, circle with, oh, deciduous trees. Usually when you put on trees, you usually demarcate where the trunk is, just so we have a sense of it, and it just pops it immediately as a tree. Not everybody does that, and especially if you're not very good at drawing circles, you could start to say, well, is that actually a pond as well, or is this something different? So if you are going to use circles, especially when it comes to trees, try using some kind of tracing stencil or something else you can use that's easy and quick. We don't need to reinvent a lot of the wheel here. A lot of this is already right in front of us. Neil?
Yeah, I really like the use of a circle template, which will give you a bunch of different size circles, and then every time you draw pretty much a very clean circle. And then you can learn to use that to draw, tree-like circles with a little bit of vegetation character to it. And it just makes it so you can get consistent with it. The title block, remember, this is your base map. So this is the map that then will be used to do all the other map layers on top of. So having a clean title block for this, and also not having it totally full of words or other information, is really helpful to allow you to then overlay more information onto it and do that cleanly and clearly, so that you can look at how you're building up your map layers through time and your site understanding using those map layers.
Great point. I'll just go down here and show you something I don't want to see. So they have used, as Neil was talking about before, they have labeled with numbers different elements on their site, but they've put that legend on a separate piece of paper, on a separate PDF. And that's difficult because if we ever lose this map here, we've lost that information. So you want this map to stand alone. You want to be able to give this to somebody and they'll understand all of it. So really consider that when you're building these maps, that if you've labeled something, it is on this map and this map alone, so that way this always stands by itself. And as Neil was saying, this map's going to be used for every other assignment, so you want to make sure it's clean, it's clear, there's room on the outside. You want to be able to have areas, because as we go through these layers, there's going to be more information you're going to want to put on here, and you're going to want to allow for clarity. So it's an important piece to remember.
Yeah, I want to just second a couple things on that.
Yeah, I'll go back.
So having things on different pages, especially in our setting where we're looking at things digitally and remotely, makes it really difficult for us to get a good understanding and give you good feedback of the map and the site, because we have to flip back and forth between the pages. We can't just put both pages on the table together. So that's a really important point. Because there's a lot of detail asked for in the base map assignment, and you're practicing communicating and stuff, especially if you do a hand drawing, but also if you do a digital drawing, you may want to have one that is much more open and clear with fewer details on it, and then make a photocopy of that, and then you can use that for future assignments and then build on that and add some of the more details to the base map for this assignment, just so you have something that's really open and clear that's easy to work with for the future assignments as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent. And we've got one more for you here. So again, very simple, because you don't have to focus on the entire site. This is important. If you have a big site, it's usually easier to focus on a small area and start to hone your skills on a small area instead of taking the whole area. So what they've done here is they've given us a big area. They've given us the whole boundary. They've given us the whole conversation. They've shown us where the second growth is. They've used a scale, which is fine, but I have no idea if this is in feet or meters. So that is something to really consider and understand. And then what they did is they took this area and then they gave us, again, a smaller area and decided to do a hybrid. So they've done drawn and they've done digital. So again, as Neil was talking about, we've got a pretty good legend with a number of different numerically connected numbers. Now that I see that their scale down here is in feet, I'm going to have a better understanding that probably that other one was in feet as well, but I'm not sure completely. A couple things that they've done, which is great, is they've done some conversation around pathways that hasn't made it out to a legend. So again, I would strongly suggest if you put something in here that is indeed a new symbol, something I don't understand, just put it into the legend. Helps everybody going forward. Any moment for miscommunication is a moment that somebody has to take time to understand your map before they can actually dig into it. But very simple, very easy. My notes for this person was, what's all of this material? Is this all lawn? Is this all natives? You know, what's all the blank material? So make sure every single area of your map is described. I don't know what's in here. 2 storage shed currently under construction. I still don't know what the ground cover is. Something I came back for these folks was, are there any utilities here? And if so, where? So keep that in mind that we were going to ask the same questions over and over. And it's all in the requirements. All you have to do is read or take a look at some of these examples and you'll be well set. Neil?
So one comment about this one that is disruptive to me when I try to read it and take it in is that the numbers are all over the place. As I mentioned earlier, it'd be nice to have them either progress from left to right or top to bottom, or be kind of clustered in groups so that it's easy to look from the number over to the legend and correlate them. And I like how they've organized their legend into categories, but I think that to me it would be easier if I could just look at one, look at the top, 2, look at the next one, because I'm going to be scrolling across the page up and down or left to right, and taking the information in that way. So it's easier for me to look from one to the other and correlate them, as opposed to like 13, okay, where's that? And then I got like 17 now, we got to go to a different spot, so on and so forth. That for the other thing, if you can scroll back to the larger one, I do really encourage folks to do this if they've got a big site and or they just want to focus their design on one portion of the site, is to do a separate map that's basically what's called a detail, where you look at a smaller portion. What I also want to see is when we look at some of the pattern aspects of the site analysis, such as the sectors and the zones, that we connect it to this larger base map site as well, because we do want to understand the whole site and the energy flows through the whole site and the behavior patterns of humans and animals and stuff on the whole site, and how that bigger site relates to the smaller site, because basically you've now created an edge, and that edge has different sorts of interactions that are occurring across it. So we don't just want to separate ourselves out and not think about the whole site.
Great point. Great point. One more thing I'm going to put in here is that they've changed the color of some of their lettering, the numbering, and also ensure that your numbers are on top of white so I can see it, or put a small white circle behind it just so that way they stand out, just helps us with the labeling. Well, folks, I think that's it. We've gone through a couple of different examples. You've seen some really high-class drawing examples. You've seen some very simple computer-generated examples. You've seen some very simple drawn examples. You've seen a hybrid of both. So there's lots of good examples here, lots of information to take in. Just make sure that it's clear, concise, and if you're confused, we're confused. Absolutely. So if you do have somebody, a friend, family member, have them take a look at your assignment and say, does this make sense? And if they have questions, we're going to have questions. So take that step before you submit, and chances are it'll be smooth sailing. Anything else to add, Neil? You're mute, my friend.
I just want to reinforce that it's best to submit your assignment on time, which gives us time to get feedback back to you. So if there are things that you run into, challenges or opportunities for improvement, you get that time to do it. And with all assignments, we're not looking for a perfect grade the first time. You can redo it and improve your score. But we are looking for thoughtful attention and intention towards improvement and clear communication and understanding.
Wonderful. And I'll just echo Bill Mollison, one of the two founders of Permaculture. What are you after a permaculture design certificate? You're nothing more than somebody who's taken a permaculture design certificate. You are not necessarily a better designer. Bill put things pretty bluntly. You're not necessarily a better person. You've just gone through a process, and it's the progression you've made in your understanding, and for us, how you've been able to communicate that helps us to understand where you are along the process. So take the time and the energy to put into the assignments, build your understanding, build your comprehension, and prove Bill wrong. Be a better designer at the end of this course, because he was very suspect that anybody was any better after a course, which I love. Lots of things to not like about Bill, but I'm not painting him as a saint by any stretch of the imagination, but there were some things that were brilliant. One of them was, you got to do the work, you got to put in the work, put in the hours, put in the time, do your due diligence to actually build any sort of conversation. So really appreciate what Neil had to say. Put in the time, get feedback from us, get feedback from friends, get feedback from your other classmates, and just get better. Mileage is the big thing here. This is something I learned from a great architect friend of mine, is that transparency paper and a pencil go a long way to learning, because if you keep using some kind of transparency, digital or otherwise, and drawing and understanding and crumpling it up and doing it again over and over and over again, you will learn. And so you need mileage on the pencil or mileage on the rendering to do well. The last thing I'll say is that the rendering doesn't make a good design. Just because it looks pretty doesn't mean it's well thought out. And the big work for all of us happens in between the years. It's the diagnosis we have during our processes. It's the observations that build the diagnoses. So really, don't worry about the fact that it doesn't look beautiful. Just make sure it looks clear. Don't try to make it look absolutely stunning if you don't have artistic talent. That's okay. Just make sure it's clear, because if it's clear, we're going to understand it and we're going to be able to help you progress. So thanks again, folks. We really appreciate your time, and we'll see you in the next video.